Right, this talk I think it's been titled Green Gathering History. So the idea is we're sort of setting the scene for the gathering by looking back so that we can bounce more powerfully into the future. And I did a similar talk last year, which I think I was amazed to see has been viewed actually a few hundred times, thanks to John recording it and our friend in front recording it. So that was pretty amazing. I never knew that our audio department was so effective in getting the message out. And I think I will say one thing, because somebody said to me the other day, oh, history, I'm not interested in history. You know, what I'm really concerned about is the future. You know, the history's all gone, it's all dead. And I thought, well, that's probably quite a widespread thought, you know, amongst Greens. And it reminds me of a quote, but I always forget the guy who said it. And he said, if you don't know history, you don't know nothing. You're like a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. And I thought, well, that pretty much sums it up. Because if you look from a quantum perspective, time doesn't even exist. So everything that's happened in the past that has created the Green Gathering is also happening right now and will be happening in the future. We are all one in time as well as in spirit. So with that kind of notion, I'm going to start diving straight in. I have to say, by the way, I haven't scripted this. This is just comes out of my mouth. But if anybody wants to heckle, that would be fantastic. If you want to jump in, ask questions, please do. Because I know, you know, they always say attention span's about 20 minutes, don't they? So 20 minutes, if you start feeling yawny and boring, then it's time for someone to give a good heckle or come and squirt me with water or something, you know. And so you're all very welcome to make this participatory, and I'll get on to how important participation is in the thinking behind the Green Gathering. But let me take us back as we start to where it all began. And strangely, this was actually at Stonehenge Festival. And this will have been Stonehenge 1979. So before Stonehenge Festival got really big, but it was a pretty wild scene. For me, I was regularly going to Ecology Party conferences at the time, and I was very excited about the kind of birthing of a new politics that was going on in those conferences. But it was very middle classy, very sit-downy, and very cerebral. It was all the head stuff. But then the other part of me, I would go to Stonehenge Festival, and I just remember one moment, anybody went to Stonehenge Festival? Put your hands up. Yeah, you remember how windy it used to get, right? Really windy. Anyway, I was out there watching some young guy. I was with a lady friend, and she was swooning over him. He had long hair, the wind was blowing, he was playing some far out psychedelic rock. And you know those special moments in life where you just feel lifted. And that was one of those moments for me. And I just thought, wow, gosh, if we could harness this spirit and put it together with all that exciting new thinking that's going on in the Ecology Party conferences, then we've got something immensely powerful that's going to change the world. So that was the thought. That was the very beginning. And it was simply a combination of an Ecology Party, which later became the Green Party, for those who weren't aware, the combination of the Ecology Party and the spirit that was alive in Stonehenge Festival. And having had that thought, I took it to the next Green Party conference and proposed a motion saying instead of having a conference the following spring, we should instead have a summer gathering. You know, we're Greens, let's get out on the earth and actually really start to connect with each other and with the natural world in a deeper way. not just with here, but with here, with here, with our whole bodies. And so that was the founding thought. Unfortunately, that vote was lost at that conference. And I do remember there was quite a kerfuffle when the vote was narrowly lost, because the chair had been a bit biased in trying to push the debate against having an outdoor sitting in the mud event. And so there was a point of order, Mr. Chairman. He was challenged. Anyway, the motion stuck, but those of us who supported it got together that lunch and said, well, what the hell, let's just do it anyway. And the following year, 1980, so please ignore this T-shirt that I'm wearing, which says the Green Gathering started in 1982. Well, strictly speaking, it is true, because for the first 2 years, it was called the Ecology Party Gathering. And then in 1982, and I'll get onto this, there was a kind of a real birthing moment. You know, it's like it had been sort of in utero for the first 2 years, and then something happened when we changed the name to the Green Gathering. And it was the first thing in the UK where we used the word green in the new context. We'd seen the birth of Die Grünen, the De Greens in Germany, and we, for us, the notion of green was of this wider movement that embraced non-violence, social justice, ecology. It embraced all these different social movements, and we were creating a new political movement that was much bigger than all of that. But I don't want to rehash what I said a year ago. As I said, I was impressed how John and David and the audio team got it out there. So rather than rehash Green History 1, I'd like to dive into a different area in this talk, which is more sort of Green History 2, where I'd like to go more into the thinking behind the Green Gathering and why this event is a particularly radical event, and why it's different from a lot of other events out there. And let me start off by saying that it is a gathering. It is not a festival. And we always, at the beginning, we made a key distinction between those two things. And this is based on the notion of participatory democracy, which is core to green thinking. In other words, you don't just come as a consumer and expect everything to be laid on, but it's rather more founded in the idea that, you know, bring what you expect to find, share, get to know your neighbors, and all of us together, let's make this event. And that was a core part of the notion, and why we called it the Green Gathering and not the Green Festival. Festivals, fairs were much more associated with consumerism, with things being put on, you know, a high ticket price and so forth. So we wanted to create a different kind of event, a green gathering. And I have to say, I was a little disappointed when I saw in some of the publicity for this year, it was called the Green Gathering Festival. Hang on, I thought, hang on, did they miss the memo? I mean, it's not really the founding concept, at least, of the gathering and what the gathering is intended to be, which is human scale. So you will see there are no big venues on this site, and also don't expect just to be entertained. Bring your own entertainment with you. You know, if you're a singer, just find a fire or a circle and just sing. Bring what you've got and share it. So that was really part of the core vision behind the gathering. The other notion behind the concept of a gathering is that we were gathering the tribe in a very, very real sense, in the sense that we were creating this new political movement, a green movement. And by green, I should say, I don't just mean environmental, and I don't like that word. I've never been an environmentalist. I'm always a political ecologist, big difference. But we were really concerned that we were embracing the wider green movement, social justice, women's movements, men's movements, non-violent groups, animal rights groups. There's a whole wide variety. I mean, just wander around the campaigns area, you'll see exactly what I mean. This is the broad green movement. And so the concept was we were gathering this, and we had a slogan that we used, the Greens are gathering. In other words, you can imagine the tribes of ancient sort of gathering on the hill, in the summer to pull together all their strength and to feel their unity and their togetherness. And it was this concept behind the notion of pulling together and creating a green movement. Now, of course, however many years we are later, God, 2024, and we actually have a massive, massive global movement called the Green Movement. And so, but that was the idea there right at the beginning when we were seeding this idea, and we wanted to create this notion of a green movement. And it was underpinned philosophically because from where we were looking at it, all these different social movements, they were all linked in terms of a political philosophy. There was an underlying theme. De Grünen, the Greens in Germany, had what they called their basic principles, which was social justice, non-violence, ecological wisdom, and grassroots democracy, participatory democracy, bottom-up organizing, which is very different from the kind of politics that we are used to, where you elect somebody and then they take all the decisions on your behalf. This was a more kind of anarchistic approach, which leads fundamentally to people feeling more empowered because they're more in control of their own lives. They're able to take, in community, the decisions that really affect them and their lives. So we saw this as transformative in a spiritual sense, as well as in a political sense. And there was no separation between spirit and politics. You remember the slogan from that time, the personal is political, or the political is personal. Well, we took that on board, and it was very much at the heart of green gathering thinking, which is that if you want to go and change the world out there, well, walk the talk. Go out there and actually live that new life yourself. And that's core. And you see it now in a lot of what's become known as lifestyle politics. But for us, it was a much bigger subject than just sort of riding a bicycle or recycling your Oatly cartons. It was something more profound. It was how we relate to each other, because we were all immersed in the ideas of nonviolent revolution, where how we communicate with each other is fundamental, and that's where militarism really begins. It begins on a very personal level. How do you tell your kids off, when they're growing up? Are you shouting at them a load? Are you giving them no's all the time? Or are you really creating a kind of culture where people feel empowered and children grow up independent and free? So that was a deeply personal politics as well. You might call it the micro politics as well as the macro politics. So all of these ideas were embodied in the early green gathering. So you're starting to see that this is a very different kind of event from the mega festivals that were being put on for people at the time. And because it was a bring what you expect to find type of event, we were able to keep the cost very low, and we were always very crew heavy. So people who wanted to could come to the gathering, and it was always very easy to find a role to come and be part of it. And that was also key to the whole participation ethos. So that is all kind of right there at the beginning, the conceptual stage, if you like, of the Green Gathering. Then something happened in 1982 when we changed the name to Green, and we also adopted the sunflower as our logo. And this was the first time the sunflower had been adopted in the UK as a symbol. It was being used by a few embryonic Green parties in mainland Europe. And we wanted to make that a worldwide movement. And the flower and the yellow that's bringing the sun in, it seemed just like a very beautiful, simple, almost childlike symbol. So we adopted the sunflower, which is still incorporated into the Green Party logo to this day, and we of course used the colour green. Curiously, what's now the Green Party was not using the colour green at the time. Its colours were actually turquoise, coral, and white, which unfortunately seemed to come out as red, white, and blue on the kind of amateur printing that was available at the time, and. It was. Do you remember Gestaltner, duplicators? We used to have daily site newsletters, no websites. That was it. No emails, none of that stuff. So organizing an event was a very, very different type of organization to, the era of websites and apps and emails that we have now. And it was actually, we recognized even more the importance of people coming together. And that is another fundamental idea, because so often these days, we think we can just do it all remotely and use the computers and Zoom and Teams and all these other things that are available now. Whereas back in those days, of course, you got together. And what we said, you get together in small groups so that it's a chance for everyone to speak up and share. And the whole idea, you build consensus. It's not about just one majority ruling over the minority. You talk through your issues, and we learnt skills of developing consensus and getting all ideas out, even from the shyest person in the circle, so that everybody contributes, because that makes the whole stronger. And it means that everybody who's part of the group feels engaged. They feel they've bought in to the project or the idea or the decision that's being taken. So you can imagine that some of our, as we were called the Green Collective in those days, some of our meetings took quite a long time. We would have planning meetings which lasted the whole weekend. And they were huge fun, because we'd make music and we'd hang out for the whole weekend. And that was how we would get it together. All those early green gatherings were held at Glastonbury. And it started because I knew Michael Leavis, so I went to him and I said, well, actually I didn't know him very well, but I tried it on him anyway. And he said, yeah, okay. So the first green gatherings were at Worthy Farm. And so we were able to use some of the Glastonbury Festival facilities that were there, which was fantastic. And at the very beginning, I'm embarrassed to say that we thought we needed, in order to attract people, we would have needed a few kind of well-known names. And we did have amplified music, but not on the site itself. This was up in the barn next to the farmhouse. So we had Roy Harper and I think we had a kind of a version of Hawkwind, and a few other bands like that would come along, the ones that were big at the time. And we had a very big involvement right at the beginning from Tally Valley, the teepees. And that was core. I should say there was really 3 contingents at those early gatherings, and they each went to different parts of the field. At one end, you had the Tally Valley, you had a circle of teepees, you had a lot of people with no clothes on, you had sweat lodges, you had the drum that kept going throughout the whole gathering. And you had a very, very earthy feeling then, and a connection with our tribal roots, people living in circles. Then you had another part of the site, you had travellers. You had people in buses plugging in their jennies, playing Jimi Hendrix, loud, late into the night, and a very different kind of person, but again, a really rebellious spirit. But there was a lot of clashes between them and the middle-class greenies, the Ecology Party people, sitting in their little camping chairs, discussing community ground rent or basic income, and thinking, well, hang on, we thought we were coming to an Ecology Party policy discussion outside, and what are all these weirdos doing? So, and I say all that because at that time they were very, very different groups of people, and you'd think, gosh, what have we done here? And now, what you see, it's almost seamless. All these different communities seem to blend in, and that's what's happened, the cross-fertilization as the green movement has grown. But in the beginning, it was very, very different camps, different parts of the festival. The Ecology Party types set up a non-violent direct action group, of course, and decided that they were going to go and cut the Jenny leads from the Jimi Hendrix Experience, kind of 2 a.m., rock it out. Red Ice, I remember, was one of the buses that was converted. There was a bus, the whole side of it literally dropped down and it turned into a stage. Quite remarkable. And I have to say, some of the music was pretty hot. You know, as a young guy, I could easily jump into any one of those three different areas and have a fantastic time. But the Green Gathering '82 was the first one that was called the Green Gathering. It was the first time we used the sunflower in the UK, and we published a thing called the Green Declaration, which was a summary of our values, and it was produced on site with all the different groups that were there. So you can imagine that was a tortuous process that went on continuously throughout the whole event. But we were really serious about trying to formulate a political philosophy that everybody could buy into. And so a lot of the ideas I've been talking about, they were all embodied and part of that Green Declaration. In fact, I have a copy at home somewhere. We should probably publish it on the Green Gathering website as an example of the kind of thinking that was going on right back in 82, let me be more specific. So you got the idea, born right at the tail end of the 70s, when a lot of what had been happening in the 70s was kind of fading, and then the Green Gathering kind of flowered in the 1980s. Last year I did talk about the cross-fertilization between the Green Gathering and the peace movement and Glastonbury Festival. I guess some of you have been to Glastonbury Festival. Anybody? Yeah, a few have been there. Well, you know there's a big area there called the Green Fields. And Michael Eavis once came to me and he said, the Green Fields, oh, I love the Green Fields. It goes right back to the spirit of '71, says he. He said, this is the original Glastonbury Festival. This is what it was intended to be. That was his comment to me. And but of course, at the time when it began, it was not a deliberate concept. Michael invited us because he had at that point said, well, no, you can't have your gathering at Worthy Farm anymore. You're going to have to go somewhere else. But because I'm letting you lot down and I feel bad about it, you can bring your gathering and have it, and I'll give you a field inside the main festival. So in other words, the Green Fields were born out of guilt. Michael's guilt for having let us down. But we took advantage of it and we organised literally a green gathering, and we had our own separate gate on it. We had our own speakers, we had our own bands, we brought all our team, we ran it the way we wanted to run it, and we created the Green Fields. And they're still going very, very strong, massively popular to this day. I mean, they're not organised separately. It's all part of the main Glastonbury Festival these days. But it's part of the Green Gathering legacy that we created the Green Fields at Glastonbury. And at one time, I think they've shrunk a little bit now, but at one time it covered about 1/3 of the entire site. It was actually quite a major part of the festival. And the strange thing, because when Michael said it reminded him of 1971, what he didn't say was who came up with the idea for Glastonbury Festival in 1971, because the dominant myth out there is that Michael Eavis created the festival. Everybody thinks he was the founder. He was certainly the farmer and the landowner. Not that I like the name landowner, but, you know, landlord, something. And but it was actually Andrew Carr. It was Andrew Carr who came up with the idea for the 1971 Glastonbury Festival. He'd been organising a Whole Earth show, which was like a fair down in Dorset, and he was friends with Jimi Hendrix in London and Princess Margaret, and he was tripping with them and having fun with them, and then decided, well, what we really need is a festival at Glastonbury. So he came down and he asked Michael, and he actually, fortunately for him, he was introduced and Michael was receptive to it. He'd had his own little sort of mini event the year before in 1970. So he said yes to Andrew and Arabella Churchill, and they put on that event in 1971, which led to an album that was produced of all the bands. And that's the one that went down in legend as being the event in Britain that really created that new spirit. And I don't know if it's still the case, but for many, many years they had a stage just called the Spirit of 71 at Glastonbury, and it's probably still there, if you can find it in the middle of the night and looking around. So there we were. We had the echo back to the Andrew Carr Festival of 1971. And so you can see the threads, the historical threads of the Green Gathering and how they sort of came up through the countercultural movement in the 1970s, and then you bring in the Ecology Party and all the new sort of intellectual, political thinking that's going on in there, and you put it all together, and then you produce this thing in 1982. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit into what then happened a couple of years later. Some of you will remember the walk from South Wales, from near here, to Greenham Common by a group of women that led to the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, and eventually led to it becoming a women-only camp. The Greens were very involved in that whole process, and we had seen what was going on at Greenham, and we decided we wanted to organise a Green Gathering there. And we went and were part of the group that was naming the different gates. They all got given colours, if you remember. So the main gate, which became the women-only gate, was the yellow gate. And the gate that we picked was the green gate, which was the works entrance. And we picked it because it was surrounded by trees and there was a big open area, and we thought perfect for a Green Gathering. And but the trouble was that we just didn't have the resources to put that on and the main Green Gathering. So we basically said, well, it's going to be one of those bring what you expect to find type events. But we started promoting it. But then what really made it into something quite special was the fact that everybody at Stonehenge, quite a few Ecology Party members and Green Gathering supporters were at Stonehenge, and they started encouraging everybody to go to Greenham. And in order to encourage everybody to go to there, well, there had been a problem because previous years they'd gone to Ingleston Common, but there'd been a lot of trouble up there. And so they were looking for somewhere new to go when Stonehenge came to an end at the end of June. That's when the festival came to an end. And so everybody there started making these stencils, and they just had the word Peace Convoy. And it was peace because it was going to Greenham Common. And as people started just putting the stencils on their truck as just a way of saying, we're going to be part of this convoy, we're going on to Greenham next. And some people sprayed it on their jackets. And that became the infamous Peace Convoy. And there it set off from Greenham. There's some wonderful film of it on the Green History website. And it was an absolutely massive convoy. It was like nearly everybody from Stonehenge Festival all got on this convoy and set off to Greenham. So word had got round, and the local council and the police were determined to stop this event from happening. So they set up roadblocks on the roundabout at Newbury and tried to deceive everybody into going the wrong way. That didn't work because everybody went and realised then they went the right way. And then the council had dug a massive great trench across the entrance where you drove in. But then what they'd done was they'd left all the earth that they dug out of the trench. They just left it all next to the hole. So, what do you think? Everybody, these buses, have they not got a shovel in the back of their bus? So they all get their shovels out and fill the hole back in, and then this massive great convoy drives in, and the Greenham Green Gathering began. Although it quickly changed, and this is a part of another pattern, because a lot of the travellers thought this was a bit of a Green Party takeover. They didn't want to have the Green name associated with it, although it's Ecology Party still. So they changed the name to Counter Cruise Cosmic Carnival. And And that's a more kind of appropriate freewheeling name for the event that then took place. That event was memorable in many ways, not least because of the how the mainstream media managed to completely ignore it. The only people to report on it was News of the World, which did a double-page spread where they'd mocked up all this massive amount of drug signs, even more than there actually were, and and then they'd written this whole article about all the orgies that were going on and the drug taking and everything like that, and just to titillate all the News of the World readers. But all the mainstream media ignored it. But the event went ahead, and there was a taboo which was bust at that event, important taboo. There was a big debate at the time of whether knocking down fences was violent. And I dare say there's probably different views on that even here today. Is it violent to knock down a fence? Well, there was a group at the gathering who decided that it was quite acceptable, and that with 3 good hits with a sledgehammer, you could get these concrete posts to come down. So that was what duly happened, and I think over about 60 or 70 of these posts and a whole section of fence was knocked down. Now you've got to remember, this is a highly secure nuclear cruise missile base run by the American Air Force. So they didn't take kindly to all these teepees and buses and hairy freaks turning up and knocking down their fence. And the next morning, they came out with their chainsaws and they cut down 2 acres of woods. I've always completely baffled me why their immediate response was to destroy woodland. But anyway, I guess they thought that would get rid of the cover that people have got or something. So that was happened. And then they came in and they thought they were going to try and arrest the people who were responsible. And there's no way they could have known who it was, but in the end they did arrest 7 people, and the Greenham 7 ended up in court and eventually went to appeal, and Justice Gifford got them all off, and the whole issue was put to bed and everybody walked away free. So it had been very successful. There was a plan there to turn the Green Gathering into a permanent green village, peace village, at Greenham, and which was quite prescient, given that, of course, that's exactly what was happening at the other gates, the Women's Gate, the Yellow Gate, and that is then sadly that didn't happen because all the travellers then wanted to go off to the next festival, and actually the main Green Gathering was just starting over at Worthy Farm, so everybody headed over there, and it was very dusty, as I remember. So, but anyway, that is the story of the Green Gathering connection with Greenham Common and what was going on there. And the event was run in support of the Women's Peace Camp. Most of the Greens at the time supported the plan to make actions at Greenham women only, but at that point it was women only at the Yellow Gate, not at the Green Gate, which was a mixed gate. And that's what was going on there. So that is the connection. It's interesting, I think, looking back historically, you could say, okay, it's significant for several reasons. The first, as I mentioned, first I would say it was the dry run for what later happened at Molesworth, which was incredibly successful. Secondly, I think it was it showed the idea of putting a Green Gathering right next to a cruise missile base, using the Green Gathering itself as an act of direct action. And it was very successful in startling the US military. I mean, apparently there were reports being sent to the Pentagon of people being attacked with bows and arrows. I can only imagine that the American military were having sort of flashbacks when they saw all the teepees out there, and they just couldn't quite figure out what on earth to do. And so the reports, and CND then got hold of us. CND were because they complained to CND about what we were doing. CND said, well, what is all this going on? But of course, CND didn't control us. We were independent, we were the Green Collective, we were Green CND, and we were a whole bunch of Stonehenge freaks who'd just come to have a bit of a festival. So the thing was a phenomenal event. It's a great shame it didn't get more publicity at the time, because it achieved a lot in terms of establishing what was to then follow. And what then did follow, as far as the Green Gathering was concerned, was 2 years later, 1984, knocking on your door, George Orwell. We were very aware of all of that. And we decided that we would organise a Green Gathering. We hadn't got a site that year. So we decided we would organise a Green Gathering on the cruise missile base at Molesworth. Molesworth was a 600-acre empty World War II base, and the Americans had announced that they were going to use it to base nuclear cruise missiles. And we thought, well, we can get there first. And the plan was very simply get there early, set up a peace village, stay there as long as possible, and create the biggest story that we possibly could, and sort of break through the media silence which we'd experienced at Greenham. And so that was exactly what we did. We promoted it. We had to get through a fence, but we had various friends, various ways of getting through the fence. We had to get a water supply, but we had dowsers. It's the Green Gathering after all. And we had dowsers who were able to find the water supply. We had some travellers who were good at plumbing. And the thing is, within the Green Gathering community, there was all the skills you need to set up a green village / peace village on a kind of semi-permanent basis. So all the teepees, the buses, the stages, the free food kitchen, very important because a lot of people didn't have much money, but we had a free food kitchen which was being funded by the peace movement, sending lots of money in. And we had a lot of donations. We were going around, some of us, the more political ones, going around the country telling and talking to local CND peace groups, telling them what was going on, raising funds. And that was how we were able to sort of finance the whole thing. And we ended up staying there from the end of the Green Gathering, which was around about this time of year. We stayed right through till February the 6th, the following year. Bitterly, bitterly cold winter. This is Molesworth, Cambridgeshire. There was bitterly cold. There was snow through huge parts of the winter. I can remember because I'd never lived outside before, and I was in a teepee, and I didn't know how to live in a teepee, and I just froze. It was miserable. But anyway, I had a friend who had a flat nearby, so I would escape. It was funny. I think anybody who would come to visit would quite often see all these buses and teepees and benders, and they'd think, oh, wow, it's a really big encampment. But where are all the people? And so everybody was sneaking off. But essentially, we did maintain the camp for the full 6 months. We did a lot of good political things. We went in, we disrupted the surveyors who were surveying to create the base, and various people got arrested for that while it was happening. We also did some proactive work. We planted wheat. We ploughed up some of the base using Dharmaraj. There was an old oxen and a plough. So there's a wonderful poster out there somewhere of people just ploughing up the base, growing wheat. And we actually harvested and sent it off to Eritrea, where there was mass starvation going. So we were really doing swords into plowshares, and we wanted to show what this land could be used for. And it was clearly a non-violent direct action, and very effective. We created a school. I used to run a school for a lot of the kids who were living on the site, and that became the seedbed for what later became the Traveller School. Richie Cottrell and friends of his, you remember, they would travel around a lot of traveller sites and festivals, taking the Traveller School. Kids loved it, but some of the embryonic beginnings of that was also at Molesworth. And we created an All Faiths chapel, and All Faiths because we had all kind of people there. We had Quaker Christians, Buddhists, pagans, atheists, everybody. But we happened to have some good brickies from Basildon, and they put up a wonderful church. They never got finished, but we did get the local bishop, the Bishop of Huntingdon, to come over and consecrate it. And you know in English law about consecrated land? But the military can't do anything about it. It's consecrated land, that's it. And the one thing you will find to this day, if you go back up to the US Air Force Base at Molesworth, you will see a peace chapel sat outside the front of the main gate. And it's still there. And there's a beautiful sign dedicated to and remembering what we did there. So I think there's a wonderful legacy from that. But the most important legacy, well, to tell you the story, what actually happened to that green gathering and how it eventually got evicted. This was February the 6th. It was a full moon night. We were doing a sweat lodge. And suddenly we saw this row of lights on the horizon, just lights after lights after lights after lights. And we were just having a little smoke after the sweat and thinking, what is that? And then we realized that the penny dropped. This was the eviction. But we were doing a full moon sweat and we saw all of these things. So we alerted the telephone tree, we alerted everybody, we got ready. And we alerted the pledge scheme. We'd organised thousands of people around the country to all come as soon as the eviction began. So we'd organised that through Green CND, and so we alerted the pledge scheme. How many people actually came, I don't know in the end. Sometimes these things are they're just there to sort MI5 out because they get their knickers in a twist when they think there's going to be thousands of people turn up. In reality, it was probably a few hundred. But anyway, it did the job because what you then had was 3,000 soldiers turn up to try and fence the base in one night because their plan was to fence it all in to stop all these thousands of people from getting there and reinforcing us. They thought that was the only way they could do it. And our objective was simply to last as long as we could. But there's a lot of travellers there who are very experienced at not moving in a hurry. And so we found that we had a huge reservoir of skill, and Sid Rawls' teepee was still there when the sun came up, hadn't come down. And it was quite a dramatic night, I should say that, because they brought bulldozers in. A lot of people's trucks and things got rather damaged. Some people burnt their benders, so there was quite dramatic flames. It all made wonderful TV, especially the two nuns praying outside the fence. I don't know where they came from. They had all their proper nun clothes on. They were praying outside the fence. But as, what was he called, John Major, the Prime Minister, was saying, we were a bunch of smellies. And that was how we'd been defined. So when you see the nuns, it was on the front page picture on the Observer. You know, it was just fantastic PR. And so when Michael Heseltine arrived, wearing his flak jacket and got out of his helicopter in the middle of it all, this was all stage managed and planned, and we were all supposed to have been gone, but we weren't. We were all still there, and the TP were up, and everybody was still there, and everybody started booing him and everything. And actually, I think was it after that he lost his job. Because, and he was expected to be the next prime minister, and he never was, and I can tell you, which I have never said in a public situation before, a very strange anecdote happened the following Christmas after we'd kind of had we'd sorted out Michael Heseltine, which was that I was visiting some cousins, and cousins said, oh, we're going to have some drinks on Boxing Day. And we got some neighbours coming round. And then I went into the sitting room, and you won't believe who was stood there in his suit. Michael Heseltine. And this was in a family situation. And there was him, like my nemesis, my bête noire. I mean, it was phenomenal. And I thought, well, this is a critical moment. I have to say something to him. But I was looking at him, and the man was pale and white and drawn. And I don't have the killer instinct. So at that point, when all my friends from Molesworth, I could feel them behind me, just go and say something. There was nothing really that I had to say to him. But I just told him that I'd been there organising the encampment at Molesworth. I did go and tell him, and I said, I'm so sorry you lost your job after that. Anyway, so that was the end of the Molesworth story, and but that was the Green Gathering. The Green Gathering has got a phenomenal history, as I think you are beginning to understand, and I think it's only really, it's still only beginning. What I try and hope we can do by talking about the history is relearn and rediscover the potential that there is within the Green Gathering, the excitement that is there, because there is so much more in front of us than there is behind us. And we just need to be really innovative, imaginative, bold and creative. And this green movement is going to change the world. It is already changing the world. And anyway, I thank you for listening to me. I've just been waffling on and no one's interrupted me. And but I would like you to interrupt me. So I'm going to officially kind of pause at this point. I could talk more, but I would like to invite you to ask questions, or just to say, I was there and that's what happened for me. Just share your experiences. So yes, floor is open.
I was there. It was a brilliant gathering, and I ended up on the back page, photograph me and Adge, who was an old warrior.
Where were you? At Molesworth?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I ended up on the back page of the Times, and I've still got that clipping of me, like an old digger, really. So it's one of my vague claims to fame. But it's a brilliant description, what you said. That was a wonderful gathering. I've never forgotten that. You have millions of festivals I've been to, but I do remember 82 at Molesworth.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, David.
When you said to Michael Heseltine, I'm sorry you lost your job, what did he say?
He just kind of mumbled, and oh, were you really? Oh, really? He didn't have any words, to be honest. I was kind of expecting to sort of have an argument or something, but it was a bit of a damp squib. Yeah.
Can I just ask, going right back to quite early in what you were saying, you said it was the chair of the Ecology Party tried to squash the idea of a green gathering. Can you name names? Who was that?
Well, the chair of the executive and the chair of the conference at that point was Jonathan Porritt.
Oh, I thought it might have been. I just wanted to check. But yeah, thank you.
Well, I didn't say the name earlier because I was trying to be discreet. I have to say that the early Green Gathering, can you imagine the what kind of an organisation it was, where you got the Honourable Jonathan Porritt, Old Etonian, on the one side, and you got Sid Rawle, King of the Hippies, on the other, and then you got everything in between. It was a really bizarre gathering of people, but together, really embracing what has become the Green Movement. The intellectual rigour and power, some very, very clever people thinking out this new politics, and some wild free spirits that are going to give it the juice to change the world. So,
hi there, David. John.
Hey, John.
Compost John. I wonder whether you'd like to say just a few words about the beginning of the big Green Gathering at Warminster, and then move to Cheddar and what happened at Cheddar, just ever so briefly, and then why we're here with our permanent site.
I'm asking Shane to answer this one because I wasn't really involved in organising it at that point. There was the big Green Gathering. It was a new crew of people, and I was involved with the kind of early Green Gathering.
So yeah, Shane, David's just given us some early history of the Green Gathering and Molesworth and all that. And I said, can you tell us a little bit of very, very brief history of Warminster and Cheddar and what happened at Cheddar, leading to our permanent base here?
Okay, yes, so Cheddar was, we were up on the Mendips for about 5 or 6 years. We had a festival there in 2007. 2008 was a fallow year. And then 2009 was when we basically got done in by the cops. There was an undercover police officer, Mark Kennedy, or Mark Stone as he was known, or Flash as he was always known. He helped organise the Last Chance Saloon bar at the Big Green Gathering, which raised money for the Camp for Climate Action. Do you remember the climate camp? Hands up, we used to go on the climate camp. Yes, we're still here, we made a difference. The climate camp was incredibly successful. Unsuccessful attempt to close down Drax, a successful attempt at Heathrow, which delayed the runways being built. And then in 2008 at Kingsnorth, when the then Labour government were proposing a new round of 11 coal-fired power stations to replace the old ones. And loads of different groups were campaigning on this, but the climate camp had an occupation at Kingsnorth. Lots of trading, hundreds of people. I was on the group bringing canoes down from a secret location in London onto the Medway. We launched the canoes. People rowed over to the Kingsnorth power station and stopped new ships getting in. It was a week-long occupation, lots of publicity and pressure. And we succeeded in getting the then Labour Environment Minister, Ed Miliband, to say that there could only be a new generation of coal-fired power stations if they were 25% carbon capture and storage, which, of course, you know, rather like nuclear fusion, carbon capture and storage is always 10 years down the line and a few billion in funding. So that basically stopped the new generation of coal-fired power stations, which is why now Britain has about a 40% cut in CO2 emissions based on its 1990 levels, because we moved away from solar, and then the feed-in tariff came in, meaning in 5 or 6 years, 800,000 houses had solar panels, and then the big 6 electricity companies decided they didn't like decentralized energy because that meant decentralized economics, that means decentralized politics, yes. And so they lobbied the then Conservative government to get rid of it. But still solar panels are going up. So basically, the police and the energy companies didn't like this. So Mark Kennedy, who had been undercover at Sumac Centre in Nottingham for 7 years, was always on the Green Gathering bar crew, very efficient, had a bar, had a credit card. We later found out it was a Metropolitan Police credit card. They bought all the booze for the bar that year. It was very generous of them. They never got drunk, but they paid for it. And on 6 o'clock on the Friday evening, before we were due to open the Wednesday afterwards, the police said, "We'll see you in court. You haven't got some road traffic closure order signed," which all the paperwork being given to Mendip. We think the police leaned on them. They never signed it. They said the directors and the Andy Weir, who owned Fernhill Farm where the gathering was, they were all on the injunction. They would all be fined, lose houses, whatever. So we lost the license. The old Big Green Gathering went bust, owing 300 grand. A lot of people's livelihoods were really quite screwed up. And we went away to lick our wounds and came back 2 years later in 2011 as the Green Gathering, as a community interest company. And we have been here since then. We've been here 11 years now. We've had a couple of fallow years with COVID. But yes, that was the sort of the demise of the Big Green Gathering, which, you know, was a big festival. So many people I see it talk to in normal life at some stage went to the Big Green Gathering. It was certainly larger than we are now. It was sort of 15, 12, 18,000 people. Now we're about 4,500. But we still aim to be, you know, in the 90s and noughties, it was always Glastonbury and the Green Gathering were the two annual meeting networking points for people involved in environmental and social justice stuff and green stuff. So we endeavour still to be that. It's a bit harder at Glastonbury now because the the demographic is completely different. But yeah, that's sort of what happened to the big green gathering. And the undercover policing inquiry is going on, actually taking evidence at the moment from 1983 to 1993. But if you listen to Tom Fowler's talk here in a couple of days' time, and he also does a podcast, he's at the hearings every day, and we're hearing all the horrible things that the undercover police were doing. It now turns out that there was 12 undercover coppers who had relationships with female activists. We know 3 of them had children with female activists, and then, you know, a Dear John postcard, or I'm not feeling very well, I'm going to Europe, and exit stage left, and, you know, people's lives absolutely ruined. But next year, from 1993 to sort of modern times, the noughties, there will be evidence taken from undercover coppers and core participants during that bit. But I would, yeah, COPS is the website, and Tom Fowler's podcast is well worth looking into.
Thank you, Shane. That was a wonderful, comprehensive response to that. I would like to cover just a little bit of the thinking, a bit more on the thinking behind the Green Gathering, and why, for example, we have a healing area, which has been copied by other events now, why we have a permaculture field, why the gathering is set up the way it is. And the thinking behind this is simply that it comes down to ecology, because ecology involves human beings, and we're not environmentalists. And I think it's important to say that environment is everything that's outside of us. It's our surroundings. Whereas ecology is the interconnections between us and all living things and all insentient things. It's a very different concept. And when you look at things ecologically, then you realize how important human health is and how fundamental it is. I talked a little bit earlier about personal development and lifestyle politics, but alongside that is the importance of health. And this is why we really realized this right from the beginning, and the importance of changing the way we relate to health, taking responsibility for our own health. And that's why we created the healing field. The permaculture field, and why we have that, is because of the importance of the soil. It's really fundamental, it's core. It's right at the very heart of an ecological approach. And you'll see that all of these different fields, they have a different thinking. The one thing I think that we are missing, if I can give a little plug for this, is a field that is dedicated to the idea of human connection. And how we can deepen our connection, because how are we going to get off the consumerist treadmill where we are constantly looking to buy more, purchase more, you know, the bigger car, the better car, the new stereo, the expensive holiday, whatever it all is, and we're trying to meet an inner need in ourselves. And that inner need actually can be met through connection with the natural world and deeper connections with each other. And yet we are not that skilled in our personal communication and our intimate connections. So this is why I would like to see the Green Gathering, and I'm putting out a call right at the beginning of this one for a field here at the Green Gathering that is dedicated to human connection, intimacy, tantra, and genuine communication in small groups and in community. And I think that is where we're going to find the future, in deepening our connections with each other. That's where we're going to find the strength. And it's not something that you can really do on the internet. It's something where you need to be sat together, sat on the earth in order to do. And the Green Gathering is a unique place where we can pioneer this kind of work. And I think I'll finish on that note. All right. Thank you.